Joseph, can you hear me? Okay, sound all right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Good to hear you, Chris.
Okay, well, how do you just wait up here? 'Cause we're gonna do it in a minute.
Gotta come up here.
We, it's up to you. Everybody does it. like
However
now.
you want to do it. Well, we're gonna get started, so if you want to just stay up here. Okay.
It's a good thing. Most people that hold timers and usually say that. I think they do say that. The long time member.
Don't say old timers, come on.
I said older time members. I try to be careful.
Okay. So what do we got for Zoom?
We're at 13 at the moment.
13, and so we're down quite a bit here.
Several people emailed and said they were gonna watch it after the recording because they were in meetings today. So it
Okay.
is a topic that people were interested in for sure.
Way to be able to hold something up here. So.
The host who left the meeting was Ken Holland.
I know how to use it.
Did Colin do anything?
Not that I know of.
Audrey's saying that she's getting a message that the host left the meeting.
Oh.
Colin, do you know anything about why it might be telling Audrey the host has left the meeting? That is something I've not dealt with in the past.
Is she on here coming?
No, she's trying to get on and it's saying that we have left the meeting.
Didn't do anything when I was over there.
Okay, then I'm not, maybe it's on her end. I'm telling her to try again. Yes, Dave Martell's getting the same message. Oh my goodness. Maybe because we're recording. No, because I let people in after.
Can you go to that one right there? What does that say?
Allow participants.
Rename themselves.
Enable meeting room. Oh, last meeting.
Oh, yeah.
I have no idea why that's checked.
That's-
Okay.
Okay. That was.
Thank you.
Yep.
I don't know. Thank you.
Now we can.
So we're
People
ready
are
to go.
coming in now, so it's unlocked for sure. Okay, yes,
That might be the last of most people coming.
we're ready.
We are ready. We're ready to rock and roll.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Chris Colby, this 2020-21 Rotary President, and I'm happy to be back with you after a 3-week hiatus where I have had my total knee replacement done, and I'm not quite dancing in the streets, but I'm able to get around, and I'm very happy to be back with you, and hopefully we can continue to get things moved along with our Rotary Club. I'd like to start today with the 4-way test. Robert Mueller will lead us in that. Robert?
Will you join me? Of the things we think, say, and do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair?
Concern?
Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Robert. We also have a reflection from Michaela Schmidt. I believe she's on Zoom.
She is trying to come in, so if we could move forward, here, she's coming in right now.
Okay.
Okay,
Is she in?
yes, and I'm asking her to unmute.
Okay. All right, Michaela, you are ready for a reflection?
Yeah, sorry about that. I couldn't get in, but nonetheless, hello. And the reflection today I chose is called The Old Carpenter. A carpenter with years of experience was ready to retire. He communicated with his contractor about his plans to leave the house building business to live a more leisurely, retired life with his wife and family. The contractor felt a little upset that his good and experienced carpenter was leaving the job, but he requested the carpenter to build just one more house for him. The carpenter agreed with the contractor, but his heart was not in his work like it used to be. He resorted to shoddy wood workmanship and used inferior materials for building the last house of his career. It was an unfortunate way to end his career. When the carpenter completed the house and the employer came to inspect the house, he looked around the house, and just before he exited the house, he handed the front door keys to the carpenter. "This is your house," he said, "my gift to you." This was a huge surprise to the carpenter. Although it was supposed to be a good surprise, he wasn't feeling good, as he felt a deep shame inside him. If he had only known he was building his own house, he would have done it differently. Now he had to live in the home that wasn't built that well. So, like the carpenter, we build our lives in a distracted way, sometimes reacting rather than acting, willing to put up with less rather than be the best. So, give your best. Your attitudes and choices will make today be your life tomorrow, and so you should build it wisely.
Thank you, Michaela. Very nice. I'd like to welcome our speaker, Peter Demerit, visiting Rotarians in person. And looking around, I don't think we have any visitors today, and via Zoom. And I guess I would also defer to Elizabeth. I don't think we have any visitors on Zoom. So thank you all for participating, both in person and online on Zoom. We'll move on to our regular meeting. Rotary next week will be Zoom only. We've made the decision to not have the small groups meetings at the Centerstone and at Trinity. And so we will do a regular Zoom meeting that I believe Colin is going to host from his office. And we'll be sending out an invite just like a regular meeting. Further details regarding our future meetings are yet to be formalized. As you are aware, the state through the governor's office has issued new guidelines, and we are struggling a little bit as to trying to figure out how we should react to those requirements. And number one, it appears that the country club will be available. They believe that they fit into allowing at least up to 25 people for our meetings. So we're okay there. And then we just need to be comfortable that having live meetings is worthwhile. As an example, today we have what 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 of us that are at the meeting, and so we're falling short. And if we continue that, then there really tells us that maybe there's a better idea of moving forward for a period of time. So I will be communicating with our board and getting a decision about that within the next few days. We have a bell ringing announcement from Mark Neville. Mark, if you want to unmute yourself and put on your hat, and let's have a little Christmas cheer.
Welcome, welcome. Greeting you as your bell ringing chairman, or as I like to say, Lord of the Rings. We're about to begin our journey again this Saturday, November 14th. All of our ringing this year is at the Hy-Vee on 37th Street, the Hy-Vee North. So we'll be ringing in the atrium there. You'll have to bundle up a little, but you'll be out of the wind. It's always a nice place to be. Now we're doing pretty well for this Saturday. All of the slots have someone. There are 2 slots that still need one more person from 2:30 to 4:30 and from 6:30 to 8:30. So if you could check your schedules, we need 1 extra person at each of those times, 2:30 to 4:30, 6:30 to 8:30. Now for next week, we really need a lot. We've only have 4 people signed up at this point. So we need 1 more person at 8:30, 2 people each at 12:30, 2:30, and 4:30, and 1 more person at 6:30. So we've got a lot of positions to fill there, 8 more spots. So let's check your schedules again for the 21st. That'd be the just a week from this Saturday, and let's see if we can get that filled up as soon as possible. We've always done it. We're doing we continue to do our terrific job for Salvation Army. We're going to do it again this year. Just check your schedule and plan. We're going to be always wearing masks, and there are options for people to make their payment without even touching the kettle. So it'll be interesting to see how all that works, and we're going to find out Saturday. But a lot of precautions have been taken, and please sign up. It's a wonderful cause. Salvation Army does so much for our community. Please do as we always have, and let's support bell ringing for the Salvation Army. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. And so I'd encourage anyone who is interested and has the time available to go to our website and look at signing up for any of these open dates. So moving on, guess I want to give you a little bit of an update. I guess I feel a little bit like Garrison Keillor saying it's been an interesting time here at Lake Wobegon, to say the least. Since I had surgery 3 weeks ago, and then a week later, we got the unfortunate news that Elizabeth has announced that actually tomorrow will be her last day of being a full-time employee of our Rotary Club. And so, and I think I've sent out a memo to basically the entire club to make them aware of all of this. So this shouldn't be new news to anyone unless you don't read your emails, which there are a few that don't. But just to suffice to say that we are making a fairly major effort to cover both the short-term and the long-term issues about how we make a transition from our current staff with Elizabeth to the future. And so on a short-term basis, I've been very inspired by the number of people who have been willing to step up and create a role in different aspects of the organization. And from a long-term standpoint, we will be stepping back a little bit and maybe revisiting how we are organized and how the club might move forward in the future with an executive or an administrative director or some variation of that, perhaps a half-time or something. And we haven't really resolved that, but I just want you to be aware that the leadership and the board are all looking at these as options. So as I said, tomorrow is Elizabeth's last day as a Rotary employee, and I would like to ask Colin if he would come up, and he has a brief presentation to make once he gets his mask on to Elizabeth. So.
Is that on? Is this speaker on?
It is on. Is it on?
I'm gonna just.
Push the button if it's not. Push and hold the button.
It's on, now it's on. So now my audience of 8 people can hear me. So this is a very challenging discussion to lose a critical employee in any organization. But it's not on, it's,
Can you move the camera up a little bit so the audience
Oh.
is looking at you now?
thank you, thank you.
I don't know if that's representing.
Can you see me now? How about that?
There you go.
Okay, I'll make a note, I have a Thanksgiving Norman Rockwell tie on, so thank you, Mark. I was Zooming at work for several weeks before I think Elizabeth said to me, Colin, do you realize we can just see the top of your head? So it's always good to know that you're on the screen. But we're here today to thank Elizabeth for her years of service. I, of course, was a former president. Chris is here today, but there have been many other presidents and people from the Rotary Club of Rochester who have worked very closely with Elizabeth. Elizabeth has had dedication to this job, not only academically in putting together and helping assist with a moccasin flower and all of the administration duties, but I found out from 2 weeks ago, physically carrying in the podium and wheeling in the banner and bringing in 2 computers and trucking water and many other physical duties. So whoever we hire in place of Elizabeth, they must be able to carry 40 pounds. But I think Elizabeth, in the short time I have known her, because there are some others in the club that have known her for a much longer duration than I, she has been a phenomenal asset to this club, to the cause, and to Rotary. And I will be personally sorry to lose her. And as a president, we all said, wow, I'm glad that didn't happen on my watch.
Yeah.
So we know where Chris is coming from. And it's not until you are the president, or maybe work more closely in a board setting, that you realize just how much an administrative person such as Elizabeth has done for us today. So as a very small token on behalf of the Rotary Board and the membership, we are here to give Elizabeth some flowers. Maybe we'll keep them wrapped based on the weather that's potentially coming, but we wanted to, here, well, I will, maybe Elizabeth should come over here so people can see her in the camera and not Colin, and I will
Thank you.
officially thank her for her years of service. We certainly hope to see Elizabeth at future meetings.
We don't have a speaker yet.
Hey, Colin, can I make can I add something here? This is Judy O'Fallon.
Sure, Judy.
I don't think the rest of you guys have any idea of just how valuable Elizabeth has been. Now, we have a pretty active World Community Service in doing grant work that helps the unfortunate people around the world. And there's a lot of administrative stuff, including getting the money put to the appropriate places and so on. Elizabeth is absolutely critical in this, and she has been the one that has made us work and made our work okay, and so that we have been successful in over all the time that she's been here. And I want to tell her how much we in the World Community Service and all the people that have been doing the work in that area, how much we appreciate it and how grateful we are for her work and how much we're going to miss her. So I want the rest of you to know that she hasn't been getting any glory for any of this, but she has been doing some very valuable work. And I want to thank you. I want her to be thanked. So please.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy. And I think your comments would apply to all of the people involved with the Holiday Classic and with all the other different initiatives that Rotary holds and runs. And certainly there's going to be a large void that hopefully we can fill in the short term, and then as we move forward, hopefully we are able to continue our services as an organization in a seamless way. So the good news is, of course, that Elizabeth isn't leaving town. She's taken a job with a different organization, but she will remain a Rotarian, and she has offered to be a part of discussions as we make this transition. So while we're losing her as an employee, we're hoping that she will continue to be a resource, because she knows where some of the bones are buried, you might say. And so it will be nice to have her available, and we certainly appreciate that offer as well. So best of luck, and we'll certainly be working hard to make this transition work for everybody, and that we can kind of keep things going. It hasn't been an easy time with all of the COVID changes, as well as this situation. So while we may have some drop off from time to time, we'll hopefully be able to keep most everything going, keep communication going to everybody, and so on. So more later on that. Okay. Now I've been notified that our program is here, Peter Demerit. I'm going to introduce him briefly, and then Peter, I'll hand it off to you, and you can, if you're not unmuted, you can unmute yourself and then take it from there. Peter Demerit is an associate professor in the College of Education and Human Development, and an affiliated faculty member at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Minnesota. His major research interest includes the development of improvement culture in schools and other organizations, and student acquisition of psychological capital and other social and emotional learning factors. He is the author of Producing Success, The Culture of Personal Advancement in an American High School, which was released in 2009 by the University of Chicago Press, and is the past president of
You accidentally muted yourself, I think.
Maybe don't rest.
Okay, I think I touched that. Okay, I think we're back on again. Peter is a former middle school social studies teacher. He now teaches courses in anthropology and education, school improvement, culture, and leadership, and research methodology. So we look forward to, Peter, to your program, and it's all yours if you want to take it from here.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that warm introduction, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be with all of you today. Thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. So we're going to be talking about several things today. We're going to be talking about race, and especially how anthropologists tend to think about race and different ways of being human. That's very kind of foundational knowledge, I think, for all of us. And by the way, this is a topic that your club reached out to the University of Minnesota on for a speaker, a presentation on race and social justice and racial justice. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So it's important that we have a grounding in understanding race and what it tells us about people and what it doesn't tell us about people. So we'll start there. And then we'll talk about racism, how people encounter that. And I'll share a bit about my own kind of racial journey towards self-awareness, trying to become more aware of my own race in relation to others. And then we'll talk about what we can do. And I think one of the things that we can do as leaders of and in different kinds of organizations, which is truly, I think, a commonality in your membership, is building anti-racist organizations, and especially building anti-racist organizational culture. So that's where we're going. And then we'll have time for questions and comments towards the end. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and Elizabeth might have already handed out to you a handout that I prepared that I've been using for a little while. We'll use that a bit, and I've also got some PowerPoint slides. Elizabeth also has those PowerPoint slides that will be available to you as well. So let's get rolling here, and let's see. I think we're going to start with, this is kind of the outline. This is kind of our plan for our time together. So like I said, we'll be talking about race and ways of being human, racial self-awareness, and then several different ways that leaders of and leaders in organizations can build anti-racist culture, all right? We'll be talking about understanding people's needs and motivations in any kind of group or organization. We'll be talking about leading on meaning making for equity and anti-racism. We'll be talking about paying close attention to the language that we use as leaders. We'll be talking about instilling democratic processes and open discussion in our organizations. We'll be talking about distributing or sharing leadership as well. We'll be talking about the importance of learning. And we all have so much to learn here, especially white people. And I'm speaking for myself especially. So it's important that organizations establish low risk climates for learning about race and ways of being human. And then of course, the role of leaders in protecting core values and commitments. So let's go over for a second to that handout. And I just want to start here. Some of you perhaps have been to, I'm wondering if any of you have been to the Minnesota Science Museum's exhibit on race that's been around for several years. It was first there about, yeah, Judy's been there, way to go. And it was there about 10, 12 years ago. It's made a return. It's also completely available online. The exhibit is called Race, Are We So Different? And it's a really good resource for learning about race and what race does and does not tell us about different ways of being human. And so just a couple of key points here that races as they're imagined by the public actually don't exist in terms of the genetic evidence, right? Only a tiny number of genes account for so-called racial traits, and the genes of African American and European or white Americans are probably about 99.9% alike. But meanwhile, there's more genetic variation within so-called racial groups than across them, right? But we do know that race has been used persistently through history to categorize people, to discriminate against people, to enslave people, to exploit people, right? So that's a really, really important distinction, that biologically race doesn't tell us that much about how people are different, but sociologically and through history, race tells us a lot, and we need to pay attention to that. And one of the things we especially need to pay attention to there are people's lived experience with race. And so here in this handout, I do talk a bit more about culture, and we're not going to talk too much about that today, but I'm sure many of you have all kinds of definitions of culture that you could share, but we might think about culture as a system of meanings that we make sense out of the world with, kind of what you need to know to get along around here. But how culture does structure our thoughts and behaviors largely unconsciously, that's pretty key. And also just to keep in mind that ethnocentrism is a pretty natural kind of human adaptation. It can be hard to see the worth in other ways of being, given the familiarity that we have with our own ways of being. But cultural relativism is a pretty key concept to come out of anthropology, especially the work of Margaret Mead and Franz Boas. And what it really asks us to do is to try to understand other people's cultural behaviors on their own terms, and to try to understand them as making sense from their point of view before we judge them. I actually think it's really hard not to judge as people, if we're going to be honest about it. But cultural relativism asks us to try to understand in context before we judge. That's pretty key, right? So just a few things on that. I think one of the things I want to share right now is just my own experience in terms of trying to learn about race and from other people, and what I encounter in my life. And one of the key moments happened for me about 4 or 5 years ago. I was doing some research in a high school on the east side of St. Paul, in Harding High School. Some of you might know it. And I was at a big leadership team meeting in the spring, like spring of 2015. And the leadership team, it was somewhat diverse, but at one point it divided into two tables. And there was a table, I was at a table with about 15 school leaders. There was another table of about 15. The table I was at was with entirely white people, except for an African-American assistant principal at the school. And so she sat down with us, and the idea was to take stock of how the school had been doing with regard to its efforts in racial equity that year, and kind of chart the work ahead for the coming year. And the assistant principal sat down at the table, and the first thing she said was this. She said, I just want you all to know that what I am feeling right now is that you all are most likely going to judge what I say, first of all, on the basis of my being an African-American woman. I just want you to know that that is what I am feeling right now. And for many people around the table, this was a lot of new learning. It was a lot of new learning. And it was a kind of a generous lesson and observation that this person shared with the group. So what does that mean? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for how we are processing what has gone on in the Twin Cities and across our country since May, this moment of racial reckoning in the United States? Well, it means a whole lot, as we all know. I will just speak to my own experience as a white person. What I've noticed is as many white people begin to become aware of their own advantages, their own privileges. So for me, for example, one of the most important ones is when I sit down at a meeting, I am not thinking first and foremost that what I say is going to be judged primarily on the basis of my race. I don't think about that. That for me is an enormous weight off my mind. It's an enormous part of my own racial advantage, shall we say. And so I try to own that, right? But for a lot of white people, when they become aware of this, they will often respond in two ways. First of all, maybe say, well, I'm not a racist, right? So I'm not a racist, so I'm just gonna move on. Or they might become so overcome with guilt at their racial advantage relative to other people that they might shut down and not be active, right? What I'm here to say is that both of those reactions result in inaction. They result in inaction. And what we need, what I think we need, what a lot of people think we need right now in our country, which I think is why your club reached out to the University of Minnesota, is that we need action. We need action. And one way that we can act is to build organizations of all kinds, nonprofits, corporations, schools, institutes of higher education, hospitals. We can build organizations that are actively anti-racist, So that's where we're going to depart from right now, that point, and that kind of commitment that I think is very important to make. And so let's get into that, because there are several different ways that leaders of organizations and leaders within organizations can contribute to that. All right, so let's move along here, and I want to share a few ideas on this. Okay, let's go back here, and let's go here. Okay, first of all, I think it's very important for us to be aware of what we've learned through neuroscience, especially social cognitive neuroscience, about people and people in groups and organizations of all kinds. People have a very, very strong need to belong in organizations because we as people, we are wired to be social. Our brains are wired to be social, right? And Lieberman calls this our social wiring, right? But so many of our organizations aren't really set up that way, right? To honor that and to take advantage of that for organizational improvement, right? So one key question that you might ask people in your organizations is, how can you help people to feel like they belong in this organization? How can you make people feel like they are respected in this organization? Because needing to belong and needing to feel respected are very, very deep human needs. Another way that we can go about building anti-racist organizations or building anti-racist organizational culture is thinking differently about about leadership itself. So sometimes, I mean, often in the past, leadership has been thought of kind of as the property of a person, right? That person is a leader, and that kind of leads to a kind of heroic notion of leadership sometimes. But I think we need to think more about leadership as influence. Leadership is something that can move around an organization, can be socially circulating in an organization, right? And so leadership is really influence. It's very social. It's something that can move around in a group. So different people can take on leadership roles. And that is super important for this work, because this work, anti-racist work, is going to take all of us. So it also acknowledged that leadership can be kind of shaped by a person's position, their power, their politics, their race, their gender, their positionality, all of that. All right, let's move along. Another thing that leaders can do in organizations are they can lead on meaning making, leading on meaning making. And what I mean here is leading on what we want things to actually be, or what we want people to believe, what we want things to mean, all right? And this is the idea that kind of culture, and we're talking about culture building here, it involves kind of contestation and disagreement and conflict, right? There are going to be things that people don't agree on, right? But for example, here's a way to lead on meaning making. In education, we hear a lot about achievement gaps, right? Hear a lot about achievement gaps, but there's a lot of debate on what lies at the core of achievement gaps. What leads to achievement gaps? Well, one of my colleagues in Minneapolis Public Schools says that what's really at the core of achievement gaps are what he refers to as belief gaps, right? Belief gaps. Belief gaps in the capabilities, for example, of young people of color, right? And that leads to a system of broken beliefs. So what he's trying to ask us to do is rethink how we think about achievement gaps, right? He is trying to lead on meaning making, right? And so in the school that I've been doing a lot of work in on East St. Paul, they spend a lot of time thinking and talking about students' capabilities, We'll talk about that, all right? But also in an organization, you might even think about how you think about individual achievements in an organization, right? Are they the property of just individuals, or can everyone celebrate those accomplishments? Can they be seen as collective accomplishments? Boy, does that build belonging in an organization. So that's another way to lead on meaning making. We also want to think about the power of language, right? Some of you might be students of language in different ways. One of the really interesting features of language is that it really does shape how we think. It shapes how we think about the world, right? All languages actually are somewhat, they're pretty partial. There are some languages that have words for things that we certainly don't have in English. Some of you might be aware of the work of Margaret Mead, who did work in the Western Pacific. She once wrote about a word called tis, T-I-S. It's in Balinese. It's a Balinese word. Tis means to not be hot when it is hot out, or to not be cold when it is cold out. How many English words did it take me to communicate that state of affairs? 14, 15? They have one tidy little word in Balinese. But the key thing about language is that it shapes how we think about things, all right? It shapes how we think, for example, about young people and their capabilities, right? And so a really key resource here for me is a book called School Talk by Micah Pollock, who's at University of California, San Diego. And one of the things that she says is that communication is action, right? Talk about and with people shape their lives, right? And one of the things she talks about in the book is that we often follow common scripts. We often follow common scripts. They're out there available to us, and we often use them unconsciously. So we got to be aware of this, right? Look, I'll be honest. One of the things also that I've remembered in my own kind of journey towards racial awareness is I was once at a conference in North Minneapolis, and it was on Youth Voice. And there was a young person of color at that conference that was wearing a t-shirt that said, whiteness, it's everywhere you want to be. Whiteness, it's everywhere you want to be. What's behind that t-shirt? It's really important for us to try to understand that. Does this mean that this person believes that there are certain institutions where the presence of whiteness really amounts to a barrier for belonging, for being able to be themselves, right? Part of this might be in the way we talk. In organizations, do we allow, in our meetings, overlapping speech? Do you have to raise your hand? In African-American communities, African-American vernacular, there's frequently overlapping speech, right? It's just part of the way people talk, right? That might be a way to question norms of whiteness in an organization. I encourage you to think about that. Let's go to this. Here's a tool that Micah Pollock has in this book. This is a continuum where what you might do in an organization is put on the board or a whiteboard or contribute them online labels that people use for certain things, like perhaps students, perhaps parents in school. How do people talk about them? And then identify whether or not each label either does not support the talent development of individual members, or in this case, students, or whether or not it does support the talent development of those particular people. That's something to think about. Another tool that leaders can use in building culture and building organizational culture for anti-racism is to be very serious about ensuring that all voices in an organization are heard. And that democratic processes are taking root in the organization. And by that, I simply mean that all voices are heard and that people have a chance to have their opinion known on perhaps an upcoming policy change or an issue or a possible change in how things are done, right? What this means really is that leaders need to be prepared for disagreement and contestation and conflict. And you've got to think about these things as basic social processes. They're basic, they're part of any organization. The key thing is that they can be generative. They can lead to change and renewal and improvement, right? And perhaps social justice, right? So that's pretty important, is to kind of set things up so we have avenues for people to speak. When people get silenced, that can lead to a very corrosive effect on their motivation, on their belonging, and on the extent to which they feel respected. That's pretty key for us. One way to think about this is culture-based leadership. So Quantz and the colleagues at Miami University in Ohio have done some work on this. They help kind of provide a roadmap for how we can set up organizations as democratic spaces where people can be sure that their voices are heard. And one of the things I like this kind of quote down here: conversation is slow, and it can be frustrating to have to sit around and listen again and again to conversations that appear to spin around and around. But the apparent circularity, lack of progress, and inability to nail down results is precisely the necessary step to bring about real transformation. Those discussions are where the real action can eventually lie, all right? And it's also, this last thing here is really important at the bottom. It's also extremely important as leaders to make sure that different voices and different opinions are being heard in an organization, and to make sure that you're calling on and hearing from diverse or divergent points of view. Look, if you're only hearing from people that agree with you, that sounds like an echo chamber for me. That is not going to be an organization that truly does embrace diverse points of view and perspectives, because that's also going to be key towards building an organization that's geared towards anti-racism. Just a couple more things here. I think it's also important that leaders are prepared to share leadership and distribute leadership in organizations. There are many, many different ways to do this, right? But sharing leadership, it builds belonging, it builds trust within and across the members of an organization. Really importantly, it builds motivation. It builds buy-in, all right, to a mission towards equity, towards anti-racism. It builds expertise by giving people leadership roles, especially perhaps people that may not have had previous expertise in a particular area. Calling on them to take on leadership roles can stimulate their own learning, right? It helps build bonds across people, within an organization amongst the members. You might also think about this. What are ways that you can provide leadership experiences for people in your organization, all right? How can you build trust as well? And one of the ways to provide leadership experiences is of course, to elevate your expectations for everyone in an organization to be a learner, to be a lifelong learner, right? And it's not kind of like, we go to school and then we're done. No, I mean, one of the most inspiring things I heard from the former principal at Harding High School, was that he said he was looking to hire teachers who will be lifelong learners 30 years from now, 30 years from now, right? This is a person that understands that if an organization is truly going to improve in any direction, it needs to be set up as a learning organization, and that leaders need to take on the role of lead learner. right? One of the things that we often hear about, certainly in education, is learning from mistakes, learning from failure. And I'm not sure, for a lot of young people, those terms are pretty loaded right now. Mistakes, failure, right? So one way to think about this is that learning involves repetition. It involves iteration. It involves process. It involves feedback. Remember when these things came out? Can you see it? It's the humble binder clip, about 25 years ago. Remember how you learned to use it? Probably learned to use it through play, right? That's one way to establish a learning climate. Call on play. Humans often learn through play. But one of the key things here is that learning can involve risk, all right? It can be risky to try new things. It can be risky to face the possibility that things aren't going to work out. So one of the key things that leaders need to establish is a low risk climate for learning, trying new things, taking chances. What that means when it comes to race and racism is that there's no gotcha here. There's no gotcha for the way you talk about people, right? What there needs to be is a climate that encourages learning and learning together, right? To become into an anti-racist organization, to build anti-racist culture. That's pretty important. And the last thing I'll say is that what I've seen in terms of very powerful and effective leaders is that they protect core meanings in their organizational culture. So for example, meanings around student capabilities and beliefs that all kids can learn, all kids can embark on career pathways, college pathways, all kids can do that. Those meanings need to be protected. They need to be protected in all kinds of ways. So that's one of the things that I would encourage you to do as leaders in and of organizations, is to think about what the core meanings and missions and values and commitments are in your organization, and to think about what you are willing to do to protect them. So these are some ideas of how all of us, leaders in and leaders of organizations, can contribute to building anti-racist organizational culture. So thanks, and I welcome any questions and comments you might have.
Thanks, Peter. I have a question. My name is Lauren. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
My question is, Rotary is I'm very new to Rotary, so I might be speaking a little out of turn, but is not a very racially diverse organization. And it also, to my experience, is not very actively anti-racist. So I'm wondering if you have examples of other service organizations that you would consider are doing a really good job at being actively anti-racist and do have good diversity and equity.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lauren. Yeah, so I myself am not active in other service organizations, but I can speak more from just my knowledge of different organizations in general. And so for me, I'm an anthropologist of education. I work mainly in K-12 schools and at the university. You know, I do think it's extremely important to diversify membership. That is important, and you know that. And there are different ways to do that, right? And part of what we're talking about here is working on the climate of an organization so it is truly welcoming, right? So that there aren't kind of hidden norms of whiteness that people of color might find unwelcoming. So they don't feel like they can belong there. That's part of the work, right? So I do think that, you know, recruitment is a part of this. But if you're going to be recruiting earnestly, it means you need to be doing the work in your organization as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So this is Audrey, and I have a question about measuring belonging that I really believe you have to measure to hold yourself accountable. And do you have thoughts on the best way to measure accountability in this area?
Good question, yeah. So I'm an anthropologist, and I do long-term field work, which is known as ethnography. And so I think one way to measure, of course, you would need to develop a design standard. You would need to operationalize measurement, and then I would survey members, right? And I'm sure there are. I do believe that there are instruments available which do measure the extent to which people feel like they belong in an organization. And then, of course, you'd want to do some cross tabulations with, for example, race, gender, etc. Right? So I have not used those instruments myself. At the time that I was doing my work in St. Paul, there was actually a moratorium on surveys in the district. But I'm sure that those are there. I would also, if you're going to do that, I would also include some open-ended questions to ask people, for example, what has helped you feel like you belong in this organization? Or what has been a barrier to belonging in this organization? So get some open-ended questions, some open-ended data that you can code as well and search for themes. I think that'd be really useful.
All right, this is Chris. Any other questions anyone would like to ask of Peter? Hearing none, I guess. Peter, thank you very much for a very fascinating presentation. We certainly have a lot of information there to digest, and if I understand it right, it will be on our Facebook page. We've recorded this, so all of this information will be available to members to be able to look at and digest and maybe get into a little more detail about things. So thank you very much. Very nice presentation. Something for all of us to think about as we begin or continue our discussion about diversity and inclusiveness, which is very much state of mind right now with all of the turmoil going on, both politically and also racially around our country. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and please feel free to reach out at any time, everyone.
All right, Peter, as a thank you for an honorarium, we will make a contribution to either the Boys and Girls Club of Rochester, the Cradle to Career, First Steps, the Jeremiah Program, or the Rochester Public Library. And Elizabeth will ask you which of these you'd like to contribute to. So I guess as we complete this meeting, are there any other topics, Elizabeth? Have we missed anything that we should go over? Otherwise, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And as we adjourn, go and serve, and remember, Rotary opens opportunities. We are adjourned.